Hello, everybody. This is Mara Lane, and we're here with another episode of the Earth and Cosmic Wisdom series. These are conversations for these evolutionary times on Earth and bringing together a lot of different people from diverse backgrounds. And today I have a dear friend of mine, Patrick Haize, whom I lived with in a community house in Sedona several years ago. And Patrick is such a wise bard and soul, and I wanted to bring him on here to share his wisdom as he works a lot in the transformational mentor area. He's also deeply steeped in esoteric knowledge and wisdom, and weaves that through his music and all of his offerings. So I'm delighted to have Patrick here today, and just going to change this view and bring you in here, Patrick. Hello to
Hey,
Sedona.
hey. Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Mara. And it's such a gift to be able to connect with you once again after all this time.
I know. We were just reflecting before coming on the call. It's been 5 years since we shared a house in Sedona, and it just feels like just yesterday on a level. But then a lot of evolution
Right,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, right? It feels like so much happens and so much transformation has gone down, but so it feels like it happened almost instantly. And
Right.
that's the crazy phenomenon, is that it's like so much happens in such what feels like such little time.
Oh, for sure. And I think we can definitely say that about this year of 2020. It's been a wild one, and a lifetime in this particular year. So
Absolutely.
I know that for me, you have. I mean, we've had many deep talks. We've had things that we've moved through in conflict together, and living together in such close quarters with
Mhm.
other people. And so I've seen the alchemy that you bring to the table, and all that you've kind of moved through in your own life, in order to really be in a place of inner mastery and really in your crafts, right?
Mm.
So I would love to talk to you about that, because I feel that so many people right now are really rocked off center, right? And struggling to find center and find ground in these times. So I'd love to open it up and just see and explore, what you would like to speak to around that, in people helping
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you for uh, honoring me with those. And then, yeah, now is one of these times that's really calling upon us to find more of a center within ourselves. And it's interesting because it's as things get crazier, it then the more vulnerable our, you could say, psychic fault lines are, like wherever our weak links are. It's like it's the nature of the reality right now is putting pressure on our weak links and
Mm.
bubbling all of those to the surface. And so, as you can see, with people that don't really have tools for centering, that there's a more and more pathology is ensuing, and it's just spinning faster and faster, and more craziness, more and more unsettlement. So, when all of these um, I was gonna say, like, I was gonna say when the craziness started, but then people are like, "Well, it's been crazy forever." But these successive levels of craziness, like, have
Yeah.
like continued to increase, and so one of the more recent ones is the whole COVID thing.
Mm.
And I remember one of the mantras that I had for myself during that time, because what I was faced with at that time, what I think a lot of people were faced with, is so many different narratives about what's happening and what's going on that were coming at us from all different angles. And I think of narratives oftentimes as being like currents. They're currents that can take your energy and your thoughts in different directions, really truly to different dimensions of existence or experience. And so, one of a long-term maxim or I don't know, maxim's not quite the long word, but a long-term rule of thumb that I've had is that in a world where there's a lot of currents coming at us, it's so important to have some sort of centering ritual that you do on a regular basis that brings you back into alignment with what your truth is. and your truth is always going to, change based off of what you're experiencing in the moment, right? There'll be a different focal point for where your truth expresses based off of what you're experiencing. um, but what I found was that, um, at this time where there was so many different narratives coming back and forth, like one of the mantras that I had to say for myself, during my meditation when I'm creating that ritual to integrate, is that when I don't know how to make sense of the external reality,
Mm.
when things are confusing to me, instead of trying to cling to certain ideas in order to feel okay, or try to, that what I had to do is relax into the idea that maybe I don't know what's going on, but that I can trust myself. So where's that aspect of my connection in which I can find solace and trust?
Mm.
And how do I bring myself into relationship with that essence, that energy of safety, that energy of knowing, that I'm connected and feeling connected to divine essence or my truth, or there's a lot of different words that we could put in there, and that ultimately is the guiding light for me, because when I feel like I'm illuminated with the presence of my spiritual center, then from that space, I don't need to know exactly what's happening outside of me, but that's connecting me to a certain level of grace that then can act as a guide for my decision making. And again, I don't need to know all the details because my decision making is still, cradled with that grace, and that can take me through the experience. So that's been a major thing, is like when you can't trust what's outside of you, you have to learn how to trust yourself and then come back into that space. And when there's all these different currents trying to pull you off to play out different agendas or to, react in certain ways, it's like, what do we have on a regular basis that we can do that brings us back into connection with our truth, so that we never get blown off of our path and find out that 2 years later we just had gone down some weird pathological, mind spiral that's took us out of who we truly are.
Yeah. Thank you. So eloquent. Love it. Um, yeah, and that's the core of it, really, isn't it? It's that we don't get lost in those currents that are, they're like false light currents. They're just
Mm,
distraction templates, aren't they? That
yeah.
that really just siphon you off, and it's like finding that stop point, like recognizing it as quickly as you can before you're too far down that timeline, I suppose.
Mhm.
But I mean, I feel also that if you go down a certain route like that, perhaps you're meant to, and there's still more to explore down there for you, right?
Absolutely. It's like wherever you end up going, there's always a way of turning that into value for
Mm.
yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that every time that it was unavoidable, because we do have free will, and sometimes we do. And I know I've had experiences where I've actually gone further down a path than I needed to. Like I already got the lesson, and I kind of
Right.
take it a little bit further.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a lesson in that also, and that's the empowered way of perceiving. Like once you've already gone there, the only way to really perceive it in order to fuel you is to extract the lesson from it, and then, and integrate that deeper lesson, and then be
Yeah.
grateful that you experienced that, because for some reason you kind of had to go that far before you learned how to come back and integrate that. um, but i
Exactly.
also but I also say on the other side of it is that, you don't always have to go down different paths. And the reason why I say that is because, um, that gives you more choice in the moment. Like to realize that there's still critical decision making opportunities like in every moment,
Right.
and that, and not to get caught in the idea that, every time you make a mistake that somehow that was like your fate. It was like your fate to make the mistake. You had to make that mistake in order to learn, because you can also learn without it. But once you've made it, then you have to figure out how it served you in some way in order for it to like boost you back with momentum in the other direction. So
Right.
that's kind of like the technique for managing when you have kind of gone down the spiral of some sorts.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been down many spirals in my life, I have to say.
Mhm.
I can recognize that. Yeah, and I think that that speaks to something that I really feel connected to you on, is kind of similarities in our own path and journey, in terms of, moving through addictions and moving through, that kind of phase
Mhm,
of earlier life where you suppress your gifts and all of that, and
mhm,
then, the moving through, into a new sense of self. And I know that you had like one of those divine grace kind of intersection moments in your own life that helped you. And I think because so many people are struggling right now, and there's a lot of suicide, particularly there is here in Ireland. A lot of people are using that exit point right now, to leave, and so the struggle is so real for so many people, and addiction patterns that maybe, were thought were healed are back again for many people, maybe in a different form than before. So I'd love you to speak to, you know what helped you bring you through, and what helped shape you into the person that you are right now, and
mhm,
ever evolving, of course.
mhm. Yeah. Well, there's so many things that have helped me. Um, that but if I'm going to generalize it, I would say that on one level, I want to give credit to whatever forces are out to just help humanity in general, and that were out to help me, because there's there's bullets that I dodged in my past that were nothing short of miraculous. And so I absolutely have to give credit to whatever higher power was working with me. And I have my own ideas about different titles that I give the higher power, the different dimensions of that. But that's not
Right.
really important
Yeah.
for this description here. But then what I would say is as far as my collaboration with the grace that, in a sense, saved me in many different ways, I would say that it was pure intent that ultimately I feel is what made those certain levels of grace available to me,
Right.
because there were very key distinction points in my path where I became conscious of the clear decision and one of these decisions was to be the best person I could possibly be, and really dedicate myself to that from a pure place. And the kind of miracles that opened up for me once I made that commitment was reciprocal in some sort of way. And I was able to acknowledge that it was very clear that that was, one of the shifts that I was able to make internally that opened me up to certain dimensions of energetic support that wouldn't have been available otherwise. And so and that comes in so many different forms, whether that comes in a beautiful soul comrade that comes along your path and picks you up in a particular situation when you need help, or whether that comes from an energetic blessing that you either consciously or unconsciously get from some beautiful being that comes along and kind of reorients your energy field in the moment, or the intuition that you get to go this way instead of that way, and then see that, wow, you could have easily gone that way, and that way would have ended in a really difficult or tragic outcome. Um, so yeah, like, again, in the general sense, I would say that the thing that supported me, that helped me the most, was be getting clear about what my true heart's intention was, and then committing to that. Um, and my true heart intention happened to be something that was more or less pure, in the sense that, like, I want to be a good person, I want to help the world, I want to be of service. And so when I was able to come to that and really clearly crystallize that within myself, and then dedicate myself to that, that was the thing that opened up for many different experiences to come along and kind of guide me on the path to the realization of that, or at least
Mm.
the beginning stages of that realization, which I feel like I've been able to accomplish at least a little bit of so far.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah. And your way with words, I just love your way with words, Patrick. I was listening to your music before coming on the call, and you really are a magician with the word, um,
Mm,
and how what you speak and how you speak can really help people, and from that place, the service that you bring with that is just, it's amazing. So I
mm.
want to acknowledge that.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Are
Thank
you
you.
are you still
You know,
creating?
you're incredible with words also, I must say.
Oh,
And
thanks.
in the way that you write is just so beautiful.
Thanks,
And
Patrick.
the only thing that I don't like about your writing is that I want to hear your voice because you have such a beautiful voice. And when I'm reading it, I have to just imagine your voice inside my head.
Oh, it's step by step, Patrick.
Yeah, right.
It's
Definitely.
it's definitely, as you know, like the creative process, isn't it? It's such a journey, and such a journey to finding your voice in the different forms and the different ways, right? That it wants to
Mhm,
express itself. Um,
mhm.
but yeah, I think now more than ever, people's voices are being activated to new levels, aren't they? Really,
Absolutely.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
And
way
language
of,
is such a I was gonna say, in language is such this like beautiful thing that we have, but you know, this thought is coming to my head of this description of language being this carrier wave um for like true kind of clairvoyant or telepathy. You could even think of it in a sense like that, but like a clairvoyant perception transfer. And so when I think of language, it's so interesting. And this is partially, this is connected to why like I love hearing your voice too, because in it there's so much more, right? And so every step away is like there's more, there's less information that is transmitting. And this is partially why I love music so much, because um, with music there's so many different levels of it's different dimensions of articulation that can come in that isn't just restricted to the intellectual level of explanation. But there's this process where I feel like, when we're communicating, I feel like true communication is where there's this living kind of clairvoyant transfer that happens. And then the language just really becomes like a medium or a carrier wave to transfer this like clairvoyant language. And so
right.
whereas, communication that isn't living, that's you could say more dead, would be communication where someone is using words to describe something, and then the person listening isn't getting the actual transmission of the space that the person's coming from, but rather they're using their associative memory and association to the actual words to kind of like recreate a picture decoding the words,
Yes.
as opposed to an actual transfer. Because I know that when I have conversations with people where there's like a real transfer going on, that I'll get these images that are moving and living that correspond with what the person's expressing. And I know that on a level that we're sharing that same kind of conceptual spiritual artifact, like we're both communing with the same artifact that's being described and explained, as opposed to, again, this like decoding process where somebody's trying to explain their artifact or what they're seeing, and then the
Yeah.
other person is just kind of having all the associative connections to how they interpret the words, but it's not an actual connection. And so then
Right.
when we have these extra things like language that create these harmonic frequencies that really create this like carrier wave of frequency that you can imbue with when you're talking to somebody, then that kind of opens you up to this psychic transfer. And then
Mm.
there's this communion that happens. And this is the kind of the
Yeah.
communication that this world needs, because this is when people can actually really connect and fully understand each other, as opposed to the bickering that we see all over social media in the world, where people are there's these semantics issues where people are running into brick walls because these words are not meant the way that they're being perceived, and nobody's really understanding things fully. So
Oh,
yeah.
uh, absolutely. It's like it's so disjointed. It's just,
Mm,
well, it's just misfires all the time. There's no,
Right.
it's just, and they're just, these misfires it just creates a whole electrical shit show, really, doesn't
Right.
it? of,
Yeah.
of misconnected individuals and thought forms.
Hmm.
I love that, Patrick.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And
Yeah.
it's, for me, for many years, I was struggling to actually articulate words. Particularly maybe maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, actually, when going through an acceleration, when your energy is shifting and you're kind of being accelerated within yourself, your language kind of goes.
Hmm.
There's a reformation that happens with the language that maybe you used to speak that has to meet the new codes that are coming in for you. And I found myself unable to articulate it because the transfer was so quick, that I'd already
Right.
articulated psychically, right? Um,
Right.
and the difficult, and then I would actually come across as a mute. I wasn't, I was stumbling over words.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's quite a phenomenon of your energy shifting and changing, which I'd love to actually speak to, because that leads us into what I wanted to talk to you about, with regards to future self and
Mm.
dialoguing with your future self, and how that can help you in the here and now. Really step into yourself, your true self.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. This idea of future self, I think, is such a powerful ally for us. And it's interesting because I've had some experiences, and I know you have also, where there's been some sort of interaction with future levels of my consciousness that have been extremely illuminating for me. And a classic story that actually just jumped to my mind also, of a figure that maybe a lot of people may or may not have heard of, but Robert Monroe. In some of Robert Monroe's books, he talks about the same phenomenon of a future version of himself coming and giving him sort of some download or upgrade, and then 10 or 15 years down the line realizing that he was the being that projected himself. See, at the time he didn't realize it was his future self, but then he was in
Right.
this disembodied state, and he had found this old version of himself, and then assisted this old version of himself to help with whatever breakthrough that was going on. And I feel like, to agree, that's something that many people experience, but don't necessarily know that they're experiencing it, right?
Yeah.
But the power of knowing that your future self has got your best interest at heart, or at least that you have some future aspect of yourself that you can call upon if
Yeah.
you need help. And this is expanding us past this physical time space dimension to realize that outside of that, the slipstream of time, I mean, there's a lot of different timelines that exist, and there's a lot of different versions of ourselves that we can tune into that
Yeah.
can be of assistance. And one really powerful practice that can be used for this process is that on a daily basis, and I've done this for certain periods of time, and it's been tremendously helpful. Sometimes to juggle all the practices that I'm trying to do can be a lot, so I haven't done it so much recently. But is this process of every night before you go to sleep to send your energy back throughout the day and send encouraging and helpful tips and energies to yourself, especially surrounding the difficult points in the day. So whenever you run into some sort of issue, throughout the day, then that your future self that night is actually with you there in that moment, helping you. And so
Right.
and this is something that you get used to then on that basis. And then the fact that you're sending yourself hindsight every night afterwards means you have, like when you said that thing that even 5 minutes later you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, maybe I should have said this. Well, it's like, well, that higher intuition is with you then in those moments at all times, which just even the knowing of that can create more of a relaxation and a letting go and like a gracefulness. But
Right.
then also the metaphysical reality of that energy and intention that is there to support you, that exists outside of this time realm, because the thought realm exists outside of time, is
Yeah.
actually there to serve you, and it does actually serve you. So that's
Love
like a
that.
really kind of powerful practical way of working with that idea.
I love that. That's great. I'm going to try that tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
good, Patrick. Um, yeah, it's. I mean, there's a lot in the future self, and in the, you know, what dimension of your future self are you connecting with, and you know what, who do you interact with? You know, that can be confusing. But I know
Mm,
for me, and possibly for you as well, that, you know, I when I was first kind of awakening, going through a big kind of dark night of the soul, kind of 2009 time, and into 2010, that was when I felt the presence of my future self really start coming in,
mm,
and a future self version of me that that just was able to upgrade and lift me out of the density that I was in, to give me a running chance, you know, at a new timeline, right?
mm.
Um, and so I experience. How do you experience your future self now? Because I don't get the same sense of that. It's like I feel like she's more integrated in
Mm.
me here and
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah. Mm.
What's your sense of
Yeah,
that?
well, I feel like, you know, the help that we get, whether it's from ourselves or other beings, usually comes at like 2 points. At one point would be, or for two reasons. For one reason would be to get us back on track when we're kind of wandering off of our soul's path,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then the other one would be to encourage us when we need encouragement, right?
Right.
Either it's like, because I remember like in the beginning of, you know, people use the term awakening, I'm just going to use it, but like, you know, in the beginning stages of my awakening, I could say, which, and what I mean by that is my opening up to, you know, it's a certain breakthrough where I opened up to a whole different level of magical, like like existence of what this thing of life and creation and awareness and consciousness is.
Mm,
In the beginning, I got a lot of connection or contact with different, you know, helpful beings. One of which being a future version of myself, and I feel like it was very much a confirmation. Like, yes, what you're tuning in is real, okay,
right.
and you're on to something. And yes, do this thing that you're thinking about, these new like realizations, these are good, continue with that,
Yeah.
continue with this is going to be fruitful, right? Which give me the permission to really commit to these different things that were kind of, you know, strange and new to me, and maybe I wouldn't be as inspired about certain action steps if I didn't get some certain level of confirmation.
Right.
And then other times that I've noticed that they've come is if I start veering off path, then it's like, oh wait, hey, you know, you're veering off path. Like, you know, here's like a little like highlight, you're a red flag for you, let you know that you're veering off path. And but then, you know, sometimes what happens, and I know a lot of people have experienced this too, is that that it seems like they start getting less contact after a while, and but that can sometimes, in my opinion, be a good sign. It means that you're coasting, like you're in the pocket, you're coasting towards your goals. And so they're like, okay, hands off, let them do it, right? You know, we're only going
Right.
to jump in there and throw the training wheels on if you need the training wheels, otherwise you're more empowered that way, so we're going to let you do your thing.
Yeah.
um so th- but as far as more precisely, I think what you're asking, as far as my experience with my um, my future self or higher self or whatever you want to say, I had one in particular experience that I think is the most notable, and this was during a period of my life when I was on the cusp of some really big changes. And it seems as if this future version of myself came in to give me a major uh, energy body boost, is how I would say it. It came in to kind of reconfigure my energy body, and they came in and had an interesting way of introducing itself by showing me a particular symbol and giving me a particular sound that was associated with a particular order. And then it felt like what was a series of probably several thousand micro adjustments inside my um, a lot surrounding my you know, in my heart area.
Right.
And there was like a lot of these little micro adjustments that were in a sense, you could think of it as like transdimensional, like alien acupuncture or something. It like opened up
Yeah.
these like different energy pockets that it didn't exist, and there are all these tiny little micro adjustments. It was like tiny little micro adjustments all throughout my torso, and then I started getting flooded with like really really powerful energy. And then this being that future version of myself was guiding me through the process of what it was like to exist with that level of energy coursing through me, and the nature of the thoughts that are in alignment with that, and the nature of the emotions and the responses towards different associations that are associated with that. And it was kind of like a 101, where they kind of take you through like, this is what it feels like to be this, and this is what you are, but this is kind of like the preview of what you are. So, and the
Right.
whole thing was like, we're giving you the preview, we give you this boost for this several hour period, and then we kind of like let go. And ever since then, really, it's been the process of me fully embodying and unlocking that to make that my way of being now, which the set by this connection that I had with the future version of myself. And it was cool. I mean, they were showing me different star systems, and they were explaining different things about stuff, and all of which I took with a grain of salt. But it became more and more self-evident over time that this was an aspect of my future self, which in a way I could even say that it was it was me, but it was also like a totally different being at the same time. But that's what you are in the future, right? you
Right.
you become so much more that it's really like you're this alien creature to yourself. um
It's
but
true.
you can find this thread of soul essence that connects you in the present to the future version of yourself.
Mm, yeah, that's powerful. Yeah. So you're basically you're unraveling and unpacking all that's being kind of installed in the system, really, aren't you? For probably the rest of your life.
Yeah, I don't know. I like to think that the future me will come back and like have a cup of tea with me once I can integrate that lesson fully. And I would love to be able to integrate it sooner than later. But I definitely, while I've been able to get into similar states on my own and sustain them to somewhat a degree for long periods of time, that state I was in is not my like set point state.
Yeah,
It's like something that I'm definitely working towards and have been for a long time.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can relate to that for sure. It's a process on all
Yeah.
levels. Yeah, and I love that because I think like you spoke to earlier, many people are having these kind of experiences nowadays, and not really. They don't have the language for it. There isn't
Mm,
they don't understand what is happening, particularly as so many of the veils are falling, and all of these constructs of what was former normality is just kind of breaking down, right? And you can
mm,
see, like, I can see it every, it's like there's a wobble almost in the collective
mm,
consciousness, and as people's psyches crack open, right? And more than
mm.
ever, people need to be able to have these kind of grounded practices that help them understand and integrate these energies, because otherwise this psychosis is, you know is
It's
a real
real.
issue.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that that I think even more people are having these experiences than people even know. And what I mean by that more specifically is that um, because so many people that are having these experiences don't have the frameworks and the understandings to integrate the experiences in a healthy way, oftentimes people can't even remember that they're having these experiences. So they'll be having things happen to them in dream states or like different spaces, um, and then it can't really dock into their uh, everyday understanding of themselves in the world. And
Mhm.
so it stays like one step removed from their walk around ego consciousness. And So that's interesting, and I also mentioned that because, for anybody that's listening, the intention is not to create this kind of like, oh, I got this like connection to these beings and they like upgraded me and like made me, or myself or whatever, like to create that, because there's not like a status thing here. I think that everybody on some degree is having these experiences, and the crazier they are, then sometimes the less likely it is that we're going to be able to like integrate that and bring that back. But
Right.
what I will say is that, one of the powerful tools, that we can develop with our own intention in our everyday lives to help us to integrate these kinds of experiences is the study of spiritual science, because spiritual science ultimately, is the framework, for being able to integrate these kinds of higher dimensional, experiences, because it's basically like gives you the conceptual basis to understand what potentially could be happening, so that there's a place that the experience can dock. And then it also, will have different the practices and rituals that you can do that can kind of prepare you on different energetic levels to not only attract this kinds of experiences that you may need, but also, like I was mentioning, to integrate some of these things, didn't have, to integrate them into before.
Yeah, for sure. And when you speak to spiritual sciences, so going into esoteric practices of like light body cultivation and kind of the martial arts and you know all of those sciences, is that what you speak to?
Definitely, yeah. There's different levels of mystical. There's different mystical branches,
Yeah,
of many different traditions.
right.
So, yeah, I mean, look across the world. In the East, especially, there's this. It seems like all of the traditions, or the majority of the traditions, I won't say all, but as far as I know, majority of the traditions in the East all have some sort of, like mystical initiation practice ritual, dimension of the religion.
Right.
Whereas in some of the Western religions, just like Catholicism or Christianity, they're in the public, um, fellowship of these religions. There's not so much, a particular like, set of methods for practices that awaken the clairvoyant or the psychic or the energy body faculties.
No,
There are in Christian mysticism, if you get into, but that's more underground, right? That's, that's like I said, a
absolutely.
different branch. Um, but I will say that all the traditions, on some level, whether it's, in the front or in the back, have some sort of practical application, practices that are used for, to prepare the body for initiation. And so, it is a powerful part of our spiritual evolution. And it's in the Western approach in its reduced form is is an indication that the over conceptualized, over mental, and non applicational kind of like, philosophical, non practical, approach that is often associated with learning, in the world, which you even see like in schools, where it's
Yeah,
it's about like, it's all in a book, it's all just a philosophy, it's all just an
right.
idea. It doesn't actually transfer into, your breathing practice and how you walk through your day, and moving energy through different energy centers, and awaking our consciousness on these different levels. And part of that, I believe, is, because people are easier to control when all of their different faculties aren't online.
Absolutely.
And, there's a lot more information, and there's a lot more, awareness that we cultivate when we start turning on different energy centers. In other words, like, our
Yeah.
feeling centers are, there's a tremendously broad bandwidth of information that can come in through our subtle feel. But if somebody's cut off from that and stuck in their head, they're much easier to manipulate, because they can't feel in a whole level of reality. And
Right.
so, due to the controlling nature of some of the forces that are behind some of the different, religious institutions, I think a lot of that was kind of taken out, so they can keep people in smaller boxes, and then, control them in that way. But the good news is that there's tons of stuff out there that you
Yeah.
can explore to be able to turn on these different faculties and become more holistically aware and conscious.
Oh, and thankfully, that there is a bulk of people who've kind of been embodying and practicing and clearing the way, for greater access for people
Mm,
in these times and moving forward. That the initiatory rites maybe wouldn't be as how should I say, wouldn't be as tough as maybe in previous times. That there's greater consciousness
mm,
access now, right?
right, right. Yeah, it's like the Peloton effect is one example that comes to mind, which is when the bicyclists, but like all cycle, that
Oh yeah,
usually
yeah,
one in the very front, it's hardest to be in the front because you're having to cut all of the air yourself. But when you're in the pocket with the big group, like there's this air vacuum, like not vacuum, but there's this air slipstream that's created where it kind of carries you. You're like coasted because there's other
right.
people doing it too. And
Yeah,
yeah, I mean that's and
love
we
that.
see that in all dimensions, right? Like the
Yeah,
pioneers of a particular style of music or of a particular kind of science. These pioneers have to cut through the jungle with their machete because there's no path. But once there's a path there, then it's a lot easier to
oh
come
yeah,
online with it later on. And yeah, I've witnessed that, in the rate in which I've seen people develop. When I was watching people develop 10 or 15 years ago
yeah.
versus the rate at which I can see someone develop from kind of like a novice into like a certain level
Adept.
of initiate, like in such a short period of time, because it's like that's been imprinted into the etheric field and the
Exactly.
astral field of the planet. And so there's all these resources to pick up on. And this is hundredth monkey, also that's like another way of describing it, like the hundredth monkey
Right.
effect. It
Oh
like
right.
transfers. Yeah,
So true. Yeah, and it's lightning fast right now. My God,
it's crazy, right?
it really is. And I think because that access is it's so there, and there's such acceleration right now. But and of course it goes hand in hand with the destabilization, right? That's happening on the flip
Hmm.
side of it.
Absolutely, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we've had many conversations in the years gone by about different timelines, and people choosing their own reality. And I
Mm,
think since moving back to Ireland, my whole life changed on so many levels that I just didn't perceive things in the same way, because I had to walk through kind of different initiations really over here. And I also, going deep into the shadow and loss on the deep levels, that you kind of part of you doesn't want to have those conversations that are just you're creating your own reality and whatnot, because you're in such a deep space, right? That uh, a lot of that spiritual architecture or languaging, to me at the time when I was deep in it, felt just not relevant, and also deeply bypassing on some level. um,
mhm.
and and I think I'm very cautious as well to speak about timelines and realities, and that to to shame anyone into thinking that if they're on a timeline that is not is suffering or whatever, that's they're not in the right place. um so I have a difficulty understanding that at times.
Yeah.
And when I see it, and I see it through the people that I'm connected to, and different friends living very different realities right now, to, let's say, what I'm seeing in my country here, where we're all locked down, we can't go anywhere. And it's like, and then you see a whole other reality elsewhere where people are gathering, and as if nothing is happening. So it's such a
Mm,
funny dance right now to witness and observe. You know,
mhm.
so I don't know why that
Yeah.
came up, but I suppose because you're
Mm.
in Sedona, and I know I know that Sedona kind of exists in its own reality totally. You know,
It absolutely does. Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, it is such a fascinating conversation because I've explored the idea of parallel dimensions as it is explained by different channels and different people and different even entire groups of people that that are really excited about that as a real possibility.
Yeah.
And I'm still inconclusive about, not about whether it exists at all, but to the degree at which it exists. Like, in other words, like, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's realistically available uh, for absolutely any dimension that you could possibly imagine to just manifest out of where you're at. There's a certain, like, and maybe that is like at a certain level of development. Um,
Yeah.
but then also the quality, or the moral implications of that kind of traversing through reality. Because the part that loses me about it is this kind of like escapist quality,
Yeah.
of, okay, well, I'm just going to shift to another parallel dimension where everything's like harmonious for me. And then but then, like, what about like the human evolution? What about the bodhisattvic vow? Like, in that sense, you're just kind of like leaving people behind to like go and live in some other cushier environment. But that doesn't. But if you're connected to the soul, to the group soul of humanity, like, wouldn't you want to be helping people, right? And then the counter argument to that is that, like, well, that is the process of helping people. You create a higher dimension in another realm, and then that vibrates out, and then that, like,
Right.
helps other people in that sense. But then the level of bypass that gets justified with that kind of perspective,
Yep.
I see not play out in like a healthy way. um and this brings me to the question of the misuse of wisdom, and whether uncovering a technology to shift dimensions is utilizing some sort of like higher wisdom for a self-serving kind of avoidant purpose. And so that, like, while it's possible, um, in a sense, it's not necessarily, it still is like some level of avoidance potentially. And I don't know fully, but sometimes I feel that there's some sort of truth
Mm.
that exists, that's worth exploring more. And
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, it gets really deep, and this could be like a whole different
I
rabbit
know.
hole to
I
go
know.
down. Is
Yeah.
of where I'm coming to these kind of like questions with myself. But nonetheless, I mean, I do see the absolute power that we have to create realities, and
Yes.
that when in more so than the individual creating their own reality and shifting, the power that groups of individuals have to crystallize realities. And by realities, we can speak on many different levels. The more malleable levels of reality, or levels of reality having to do with belief system, or like
Yeah.
emotional orientation, right? And you can see that when somebody with a very strong like sense of a certain idea or paradigm can walk into a room and then shift people's paradigms in that moment to match their paradigm, and in a sense, like on the paradigmatic level of
Yeah.
consciousness, has like shifted the reality inside that room, right?
Totally.
Then, as it densifies, it seems it's harder and harder, or at least it would require more and more like development for a being to shift realities. So,
Yeah.
then as it moves, then you could say like emotional realities are relatively malleable, mental
Mhm.
realities are relatively malleable, belief system realities relatively malleable. But then when you get to like rocks, like stones, like in the
Yeah.
world, like to make those stones turn into like orange juice, that's like a whole different level of like shifting realities, right? Or
Yeah.
disrupting what we would consider the linear process of like science, as we look at it with its bendable or more sturdy laws of science. And so then there's all
Right.
these kind of different levels of, and but one thing that is very clear is that when you get a group of people together, the larger the group of people that all
Folks.
have a like the same paradigmatic belief about a particular thing, then they create realities that become
Yes.
more and more sturdy the more energy is brought into it. And that could be seen as the entire society that we live in today, with all the buildings that are built and the
Right.
infrastructures, and the telephone companies, and all these things have been built by humans to actually solidify a reality
Mm,
that is no less real than the well, I could say it is less real. Where what I was going to say is that where the base reality that exists on is no less real. In fact, it's even more real, which is
mm,
the reality of like nature and in the laws of nature, right, in society.
right.
But still, when this new reality is created, it's like a game within a game. When the new reality is created within it, that reality has such a substantial can have such of a substantial like stronghold on where people orient their consciousness, that it
Right.
actually, even though may on some level have less reality, it can still garner more of like the collective attention and consciousness to actually fulfill what could be argued as a false reality.
Oh my
So
God. Yeah.
it's just crazy how humans really do create things, and all the different levels in which the malleability is available.
And such a powerful reminder and reference point for what's happening right now, as the manipulation of people is just, you know, at epic levels, and all of these different realities that could be a potential down the line.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I can totally understand that. Um, Sorry, our connection is a little glitchy here. It'll settle in a minute.
Yeah, I heard a little glitch. Yeah, no
Yeah,
worries.
but
What,
yeah,
it was coming through though. Like, was it
yeah,
skipping
no,
when I was
no,
talking?
no, that's
Okay,
perfect.
okay,
That's perfect.
okay, good.
Um, so yeah, okay. Well, let's. I'd love to explore a little bit around. You know, something that I heard you say actually on another conversation with somebody was about helping people with sense making skills, and I loved that.
All right.
I really loved that. And maybe you could speak about like how you're working with people at the moment, like to help them in these times, and what sense making skills look like to you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, sense making skills. I don't think the term requires much of an introduction.
Hmm.
But it's I've been hearing that term used in the intellectual dark web, which was I really loved it when I first heard it, so I've been using it since then. And yeah, it's like it's really like a um well, how I've been helping people develop sense making skills is I usually like to work with the framework of the head center, the heart center, and the will center, which are the three astral body grail points. Which is kind of so when I talk about the astral body, that can equate to what um, people refer to in the Western religion as the soul. So this is like the plasma body that lives on beyond the physical body, right? And then you have the etheric body, which is like your life force body. So it's what makes the physical like the ability for the astral body to inhabit the physical body and brings life to the physical body. But that's made up of etheric existence, which is prana and chi and energy. And then you
Right.
have the physical body, but the astral body is our mental body, our emotional body, right? And in that mental emotional body, we have our head center, our heart center, and our will center. So connected to thinking, feeling, and willpower, willing. And so, for instance, yeah, I just finished a course for spirit science, which I go really deep into this. And the
Fantastic.
first half of the course is talking about greater self-realization within the structure of the astral body. So creating a greater awareness of how can I make distinctions between different kinds of thinking processes, between how different directions that my consciousness can move. So one being silencing the mind, one being directing the mind intentionally and focusing the mind, and then another being like flexibility, being flexible with the mind. These are so kind of different ways the mind can be used, and how clarity in the mind, so the ability to not think and just observe, is what enables us to perceive reality clearly. Because the more we have a jumbled mind, the more we have opinions that are jumping all over the place, the more we're going to see the distortion artifacts of our monkey mind and miss the actual clarity of what we're observing. And then if you get into spiritual realms, it gets even worse, because your monkey mind becomes animate, like in the external reality. There's seemingly like when you're in the spiritual realm, so it's even more confusing. But even anyone's had the experiences that if you're told a lot about a certain person before you meet them, then you're more likely to focus in on those aspects and then see it through that lens.
Yeah.
So this is the idea of clearing the mind so you can see things and perceive things clearly, which a lot of the Eastern traditions have focused on for a long time. But that being a prerequisite for greater self-realization, to understand the nature of the quality of the thoughts that you're thinking, right? Whereas then the directionality is, how do you focus on a particular thing and stay focused and not let something else take you off track? How do you construct stable belief systems or stable thought forms that exist and have like a symmetry to them that are very powerful as like a creator in higher realms, and in the physical realm, right? And manifestation in many ways is how stable can you construct your thought form intentions and then match it with a vibrational signature that's in alignment with that, and then persist in your actions towards that, what you're going for. I mean, that's one kind of abridged way of describing the manifestation process. So without going too deep into it, it's developing more self-awareness on the mental level, on the emotional level, discerning our emotions and how emotions work, and then on the will center level, feeling our will center and how we get pulled in different directions, and how we need to call willpower in to push against certain currents when we want to reset a pattern in our life. And then, through the understanding of the awareness of what's going on at different levels and the different patterns, then how to start intelligently modulating these in order to align them more with our higher truth, so that then we can create more intentionality in our lives in general. And first off, have access to, a space in which what we feel as the sense of truth and right and goodness is available to us. Then from being able to have access to that, then saying, okay, from this space of good and right and truth, then how do I begin to alchemize my thought center, my emotional center, my will center to align with this access to my truth, and then have that become a way of being in the world. And this is like the level of self-empowerment, right? So then we're empowering ourselves to be operating from our own sovereignty, as opposed to operating from the different programs that before we were talking about are like currents that kind of pull people, into different actions. And so it's really like an esoteric approach to self-help in a lot of ways. It's like, it's self-help, but we're not just learning positive thinking. We're learning like the mechanisms of, the energy bodies and how positive thinking creates structures within the energy field, and how these then structures create currents that, pull in certain thoughts and emotions from different realms. And, so it's essentially, it's, kind of like, self-help, but it's esoteric, like esoteric psychology. It's kind of like a good way of thinking of it.
Brilliant. The most valuable tools you could give anybody right now, honestly.
Right.
That's the stuff people need. To clear out all of that noise, and to really to be able to discern, like to have those discernment filters and be able to flag when these external influences come in, and to recognize them. I think that's just the greatest superpower you could have and develop right now. So thank you for bringing that to the table, to the big table.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for being at the table with me.
Oh God, it's an honor. Jeez, yeah. I'm glad to have amazing people at the table, at our greater council table.
Definitely.
So, and when, Patrick, is that something that's going to be coming out soon, or is that?
Yeah, it is. We're in the process. I'm just doing the editing now. But I'd say in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure when Spirit Science is going to actually release it, but probably sooner than later. I know that they've been putting some emails out about it, so I'm assuming that they're planning on releasing it soon, so I can get the dates to you as soon as I find that out. But
Great. Great.
regardless of that, I'm probably going to be doing an 8-week online workshop um, regarding the same general material at some point here pretty soon too, so we can get into it like in a
Brilliant.
live setting, which I think would be really valuable also to be able to have the Q&A and the interactive dimension of that.
Brilliant. Yeah, so needed, Patrick. I'm delighted you're doing that. It's just, it feels so right in all that you embody and that you bring through yourself. So, yeah,
Mm.
I hope we'll share it far and wide. Get
Yeah,
the
beautiful.
people that
I'm
need to
excited
be
about it.
there. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
So I think, I feel like that's a nice conclusion to where we are
Cool.
today.
Yeah, feeling complete.
Yeah. I'm so grateful
Cool.
for you, Patrick. I'm gonna share all your links and the usual stuff below. And yeah, are you doing you have your music on Spotify? That's where I was listening, but you have it in a few other places, or?
Yeah. Yeah, it's on all platforms. Spotify is the one they usually push or point people towards. There's Spotify. It's on SoundCloud. You can find some of it over on Bandcamp too. And as far as
Right.
music, yeah, do you know Gabe Solomon? Gabe Solomon and I
Yeah.
have had this kind of project that was shelved for a little while because of the COVID thing, but I just talked to him the other day, and we're getting back rolling with it. And within the next month or two, we should probably have some new stuff out. So you can be on the lookout for that too. And yeah, you can find that through my Spotify, and then I'll be posting it on all my social media platforms once we get those tracks polished and up.
Oh, fantastic! Yay!
Yeah, yeah, super
Thank you,
excited about that.
Patrick. You're a
Yes,
star.
thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much,
much.
Maura.